supply. Another way of portraying a system, like, wheels and cogs. Now, what's right and what's wrong about this image of a human system?
Do you want an answer?
Yeah.
Yeah. You show the mechanics and the workings rather than the person.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, the person's in shadow.
And also, with something like that, there is a right way of doing it. It's a way that you follow, you're trained as a mechanic and you fix whatever it is. But unfortunately, human beings aren't like that. They're not neat and tidy with everything. Oh, you fix that bit, you fix that bit. It just isn't like that. So it doesn't look.
It's portrayed as people talking to each other, which is good. But it's also portrayed in terms of cogs and wheels as a mechanical process. And the whole thing about what we're talking about is about relationships. The whole glue, the whole that builds resilient communities and systems is about relationships. On many reports and documents over the years, particularly by the NHS, it's always portrayed as you always see, like wheels and cogs, as the image of a system. So, what we try to do in this country over the last 50 years is change the system, because we thought that by closing the psychiatric institutions that we would change the practice and change the thinking. But the big question is, did we change the thinking and change the practice? And there's a lot of evidence to show that perhaps we went about this in the wrong way from the beginning, in just transferring different elements of a system to the community without actually connecting the whole community up in terms of running now what we're talking. Have the same thinking in each group or each organisation, to have the same sense of what it is are important things for individuals. I mean, the things that we've heard about are the important things for individuals, like listening, like developing a whole range of things, like breaking down the barriers of resistance to people getting the right response to their needs, rather than being fitted into a box in terms of you have this symptom or that symptom. That's not to say, by the way, that symptoms are not important in terms of people. But if you just focus on that rather than the whole person, it loses this sense of what their needs are and how those needs can be met. And why should they be met? After all, if you're treating the symptoms and that's it, you get better. But actually, they get better in terms of their longitudinal view of life, or the actual circumstances which arose to give them those symptoms in the first place. So it's a different way, as we've heard, of thinking. But if community groups or community organisations don't believe in the same thing, and you try to link them together, there's a problem, because they don't have the same belief from the beginning. And quite simply, the recovery approach, and we call it a whole life recovery approach, by the way, rather than just focusing on the word recovery. But the concept is very, very, very simple. It's founded in human values and their application by the user themselves, the professionals and the service itself. And all three have to do this together. And its objective, obviously, is to achieve health and well-being, regardless of the degree of disability or distress of the individual. So everybody has potential to improve their lives. Everybody has the potential in terms of recovery, or setting our recovery journey. You don't exclude anybody from that belief from the beginning. Unfortunately, at the moment, some people are excluded because of their history in terms of what's happened before in mental health, or because their story is a negative one. It's actually not a whole life story. Very often people who work in mental health don't know the person's whole story. We had an illustration recently about that in a nurse in a hospital that was that was involved with a woman. 16 years she knew this person as a patient, and the person died. She went to the funeral, and in the eulogy, people were talking about this person's life and what she'd done before she became ill, in terms of that she was a strong member of the community. She ran community groups. She had a lot of skills in different things, and this nurse didn't know anything about that. So she didn't know the person. She knew the illness, but she didn't know the person, and she cried. So, what was I
And
doing?
that's the trap, isn't it?
Yeah. So recovery practice is about enabling and assisting the active participation of people. Now this is just to illustrate it very quickly. This is what I call a maintenance model. Social control, social isolation, biological model, loss of rights, low self and staff expectation, service for life, very often no exit pathways, symptom management only, and based on an illness concept, no risk should be taken. And what happens? Revolving all the time. Whereas if you look at the recovery process, it's quite different. Self-determination, which is the first building block of somebody, as we heard, somebody actually who wants to recover, who wants to improve their life, because it won't work unless that is the starting point. Sorry. The person taking ownership and control of their life, taking back the power that perhaps the system has taken away from them. So it's giving people a sense of responsibility. Very often we take away people's responsibility. It's about social networks, as we know. It's about more of a holistic approach to people's needs, as I said, their whole life needs. It's about social inclusion. It's about rights, responsibility and advocacy. It's about potential to exit services. High staff expectations for the person. The core beliefs of the team should be the same. Fundamentally important. Alternative therapies, again this comes into practice. But not just alternative practices, it's how practices are practices. How practices are practiced, sorry. Which comes down to relationships. And we know, in terms of, CBT, cognitive behavior therapy, for example, that it works for some people, it doesn't work for other people. And there's been research recently in looking at that. And the thing that makes the difference is the strong relationships that are founded between the professional and the user. That makes a huge difference to the outcome. Without that, which has been found, just by applying the techniques in a cold way, doesn't work as well, which is obvious, of course. Informed risk-taking, this is a big problem now in terms of, we're in such a risk, adverse culture. Choice being important, interdependence, which is where the system is dependent, each part is dependent on the other to create the whole. About coping strategies, the importance of coping strategies, not in terms of just, symptom control or, it's about people being able to cope with their issues. And a good example of that is the Hearing Voices approach in terms of how people can cope better with those voices, teaching them to. So a different cycle than the maintenance model. And there are lots of recovery resources and materials which I won't go through, but we can. And what we're talking about is a whole life domains in all the whole life domains that we all, there's nothing rocket science about whole life domains and whole life domains and the needs. We all, need them in our lives. The trouble is with people with mental health, for various reasons, they're either excluded or they can't access or things are not available as easily as they should. So that they won't go through education, public occupation, sports and leisure. So we believe there are whole life, in terms of meeting whole life needs, plus a community whole system development approach, plus some of these recovery tools and instruments, equals much improved health and well-being, and in a sense improved citizenship of people, and sometimes regaining people's citizenship, because we all have citizenship, but people have lost it sometimes. So this is what you've already done, the 3 stages of learning the whole system. You know, engagement, you've engaged the community. You've explored what needs to be done. And planning in terms of what you're now embarking on has to be carefully done. And whole systems of language practices, this is one. Asking the right questions. Because if you ask the wrong questions, like if you ask what services are needed, instead of asking what the needs of people are, you get a different answer. Now, I move on to Plymouth, and this is to give us some inspiration. People obviously recognise this. Yeah?
Yeah.
Fun? No, it's the Pilgrim Fathers landing in America. Yeah. And they did a good job. So we've developed this whole life development thing for the city of Plymouth. Now, the city of Plymouth is a maritime, as I've just shown you, and it's a city with very diverse social demographics. Very, very deprived, some areas of Plymouth, and some very wealthy areas. A population of about 300,000 people. And when we started this, interestingly, we engaged with a group of about 20 different community organisations. The one group that stood out in terms of wanting really to do something and change was the Citizens Advice Bureau. And it was the Citizens Advice Bureau that actually led this process, which I'm now going to briefly describe. So, first in 2008 was the formation of the Plymouth Mental Health Network, and eventually 60 plus organisations and groups came together. And this is just a list of them: health, social care, the city council, welfare, organised users, carers, job centres, police, fire service, bus companies, train operators, the Chamber of Trade, colleges, universities, Mind, Rethink, housing associations, public health, landlords, art groups, drama groups, sports clubs. And by and large, in the 7 years now since this was established, this network still exists and still meets. So this was the original purpose of the network. And it was, the CAB was getting a lot of people coming to them because they didn't know where else to go to in terms of getting some help. And also people were saying, well, I've been to X, Y, and Z, telling my story, but I'm giving assessments and nobody actually is listening. And they also recognised a lot of these organisations were actually duplicating some things. They were doing similar things, a lot of these different organisations. There were lots of gaps in providing the services, so they want to address that issue. To improve the knowledge and understanding of mental health between each other and the public, and then to advocate for the rights of people and better services. And these are some of the things that they've done over the years. And in 2011, there's a conference, and it was decided that we would develop this whole life, whole system strategy for Plymouth. The important thing